For our final segment of the Revolution Nothing Less show today, we want to take a look at a major development in the last few weeks and the last few days, which is the emergence of fascist, organized, armed rallies and white supremacist rallies taking place in state houses and in the public square across this country. And more than that, we've seen a leap in the normalization of these armed rallies and fascist rallies, where it's barely even mentioned or it's one of many headlines on the news. But we're not going to treat it that way on this show because we recognize the danger this represents and the future that is taking shape before us. These rallies took a leap when armed fascists stormed the State House in Michigan. They directly targeted a Democratic governor that Donald Trump has repeatedly and personally targeted. This is not a coincidence.
All she does is she has no idea what's going on.
As this unfolded, you saw state representatives wearing bulletproof vests, their hands shaking as they tweeted out pictures of themselves with armed men circling above them, afraid of what might erupt. And when Donald Trump was asked directly about death threats that had come from these kinds of people against governors and other representatives who are being targeted, he didn't condemn this. He didn't distance from it. He defended these people as good people who are legitimately frustrated and want their lives back, as if they are the victims.
The governors are getting death threats. Now, governors of Kentucky, Michigan, Virginia, they're getting increased levels of death threats. And are you concerned that you're talking about liberation and the Second Amendment and all this stuff? Are you inciting violence among the few people?
I've seen the people. I've seen interviews of the people. These are great people. Look, they want their life back. Their life was taken away from them.
These people are rallying under the banner of ReOpen America, declaring that they want their right to go out and not be under quarantine, not have to practice social distancing and sheltering at home. And not only is this incredibly dangerous in terms of the need right now for social distancing to control a pandemic for which there is no immunity and there is no treatment and there is no cure and there is no vaccine. Not only is this endangering lives, especially those who are most vulnerable and targeted under this system, Black people, Latino people, Native Americans, where the pandemic has ravaged communities at much heightened rates, as well as the elderly and the sick. Not only is this endangering those, and that's not a coincidence either, but it's deeper than that. These are fascist rallies. I said white supremacist, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, Donald Trump, Mike Pence supporting fascist rallies. And this coursed through the center of these rallies, and you saw it all over the place. We know this is true, both because of the work, frankly, Bob Avakian has done over years to analyze the development of fascism in this country, the emergence of it now in this fascist regime, and the many streams that have come together and come to the fore more and more in recent days. But we also know this because on the basis of this understanding, we have been engaged in a fight to lead people to stand up against this, and we took the Revolution Nothing Less show out into the streets to document what was going on and to document those forces, refuse fascism as well as the RevComs who are standing up against this. The Revolution Nothing Less show had Pete on the street.
This is Pete on the street. I'm with the RNL Show, the Revolution Nothing Less show, and we're out here in front of this Nazi, fascist, white supremacist rally of people gathering together to claim their individual rights over the humanity of people here and all around the world, including the planet itself. And the RevComs are going up against that to confront it for what it is, while maintaining our social distancing and wearing our face masks to say revolution, nothing less. And people have got to get with a new communism. And at the same time, through this segment, you're going to hear these fascists claim that they have antibodies.
And then the virus can't spread anymore because we build up the antibodies.
Claim that it's in their blood.
I got Russian blood, so that means I can't get viruses, I can't get sick.
That they are immune to the coronavirus and coming up with all kinds of crazy things.
You just gotta keep your immune system high, drink, smoke, and toilet.
Other than going to the science and the root of all this. All right, let's see what's going on.
Back on the sidewalk. We're gonna open the street up, folks. Back on the sidewalk, please. a counter protest, many of them wearing orange t-shirts, holding signs in the middle of Spring Street.
So that's some pretty heavy footage we just saw, and we're going to get into it more. To do this, I'm very happy to say not only did we have Pete on the street, we've got Pete here in the studio with us. Hey, Pete, why don't you come on over here and join us on the set?
All right. Let me get this mask off.
All right, Pete,
All right.
how you feel?
It's nice to be in front of the cameras.
We're so happy to have you here, for real. Let me tell you, it was very intense what you were in the middle of. I guess I'd like to ask you first, what was it like being out there?
I mean, I saw those videos, right, of what happened in Michigan, and we knew that these protests were going to happen in front of City Hall with this fascist rally, and we did some preparation, in that. We weren't just going to go out there and confront them. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and and we had to take the precautions, right? We're going out there and we're taking our risks, and so we had to make sure we had our mask on, we had gloves on, and we were going to maintain or try to maintain some social distancing, And I was out there, and as part of this Pete on the Street segment that we're starting with the RNL Show. But it was just really intense, It's really intense out there, and it's scary, these fascists, because they deny science, They deny that there's actually a pandemic and that they should, follow the rules of social distancing, of putting on their masks. A lot of people out there, they were packed like sardines.
Well, let me ask you. I was going to ask you in the segment when you introduce it, you say, "Oh, I'm going to show you that there's a lot of white supremacy here. There's a lot of anti-science. There's a lot of denialism about the pandemic." And then you said, "And I'm going to show you some crazy stuff." So did you see that?
There was a lot of crazy stuff out there, and people, these fascists went from talking about the herd immunity to the fact that they have strong blood, and if you have weak blood, then you're going to end up dying. And if you have strong blood, then you're going to survive through it, Even though it was under the context of, I have Russian blood. Like, look, you're talking about white supremacy here. You're talking about white supremacist blood. You're putting millions of people's lives at risk here and all around the world by going out there and, not maintaining social distancing, not putting on masks. But more importantly, this toxic ideology of me, me, me. What about my rights? What about my education? What about my rights to getting a job and all this? Well, no, we went out there, and the RevComs went out there to actually confront all of this, and that meant taking our risks, but that didn't mean, putting other people's lives at risk, It meant going up in the face of all that at a time where too many are on their couches, and using COVID as an excuse to sit it out. And these fascists are using COVID to say that this is a time for them to go out and fight for their individual rights, their individual liberty, live free or die, Well, who's gonna die, We think about, we're fighting for the interests of immigrants, of Black, Latino people who are going to be disproportionately affected by this COVID crisis. I'm talking about the RevComs here.
Mm-hmm. When you posed that, or when the RevComs posed that, how did the ReOpen crowd respond?
They replied with America first, waving their flags, just people on top of the, fascists on top of coming out of the windows of their car, waving the American flag, America first, America first. And the RevComs came out there with, humanity first. American lives are not more important than other people's lives.
What did that mean to you? What do you think it means to humanity, that there was a force out there in the face of this, the RevComs?
I mean, when you think about these fascists and what they're doing across the country, you know, and armed white supremacist fascist militia groups, you know, storming the entrances of, you know, the Congress in Michigan, you know, and all the ways that they've been emboldened and unleashed by this fascist regime, you know, really gave backing to the interests of humanity here. For the RevComs to go up, straight up, and confront that, and call on more people out into the streets, you know, uniting with the call that was put out by Refuse Fascism. And the RevComs were out there agitating, you know, on social media, on live stream, you know, to the thousands of people who really need to hear this, and not just hear this, but come out to the streets, you know. And for those who actually care and don't want to live in this world no more, get with the revolution, get with the new communism, get with BA.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask also, you mentioned Refuse Fascism, which I think is really important. I know, and hopefully we'll share some of the footage, Refuse Fascism did protests around the country everywhere they could to counter these fascist rallies. If there's anything else about their message or what they were doing there that you want to share.
I mean, going up in the face of these fascists is like I said, is a scary thing, you know, and whether their denial of science and their backing of the fascist regime, going up straight against that actually takes risks, you know, and just seeing the lack of conviction that, you know, on the side of progressives and liberals who are sitting this out, it actually was part of, you know, great joy to actually be a part of getting out there and confronting these fascists and calling on the millions that we actually need to be out in the streets to drive out this fascist regime. There was a lot of, you know, joy that came from that, you know, as we continuously need to call out more people out on the streets, you know, and just, you know, going out there and, you know, when I was interviewing these fascists, you know, it kind of just brought to mind what RevCom has been covering, what the communiques have been covering, you know, in terms of reminding back to the days of, you know, the white settlers coming over and spreading their smallpox, you know. Just thinking about the days of desegregation, when you think about these black students who were coming into these what was formerly known as, you know, white schools and being spat on, you know. This is a whole under different context because it's under a pandemic, you know. The people's lives are at risk here. And it was great to actually go up against that, you know.
One other dimension that I think is important to peel back the sheets on, actually, the white sheets on, is these are billed as ReOpen America rallies. And they were shot through. In Michigan, I think a lot of the people who stormed the Capitol, they were using that word boogaloo, invoking that they're trying to accelerate a civil war, a race war. Some of them were dressed in ways that signify that. If you are not into the race war, you might not know the meaning of their dress, but this is something that they were doing. And you see this in some of the fascists who are in the streets in Los Angeles, coming in the face of, I know, Bo, one of the members of the Revolution Club, who's an a vet from the Iraq War who turned against that war and turned against the imperialist system and joined the revolution, and they were calling him out by name. So there's this kind of thing targeting very organized fascists at the core of this, and coordinated with Trump and the whole regime. But there were also people who were broader, who maybe weren't so overt themselves, or not even that formed themselves as fully fascist, but they were being mobilized on this me first, ReOpen. Could you talk a little bit, because I think this has been used to say, oh, these weren't all fascists, these were something else, but there was something going on that was more in unity there. Or what did it appear like on the street?
Well, yeah, you know, on the street, when I was interviewing, you know, different people, you know, there was I guess you could say there were different strains of this, you know, who were part of this ReOpen America stuff. You know, I talked to a family that was multilingual, and you know, the teenage woman who was in high school was talking about her education, you know, and the fact that, you know, because of COVID-19 and because of the lockdowns, that, you know, she wasn't able to learn as well online, and so her grades were slipping, you know. Other people, you know, had signs of live free or die, and had their own, story to why, they were out there,
Okay, well, I would like to, I want to bring Andy in.
Yeah, well, first off, I'm glad that Pete got out in the street. We've been planning that since the beginning of this show, and you've been sheltering in place, correctly so, but now you're out in the street. That's great. Well, look, I think Pete covered a lot of what needs to be talked about, but I'll just maybe add something about 2 points that he spoke about. One is these rallies that took place that were not directly part of the fascist rallies, that were, in fact, some of them, like in Long Island, distinguished themselves from these fascist rallies. He said, well, we're just here because we're Americans and we want our freedom. It's up to us to decide whether or not we shelter in place. It's up to us to decide whether we go to work, go to play, go to the beaches, and all these kinds of things. The problem is it's actually there. You think that you have a right to do whatever you want. That's what you think that being in this country means. But the fact of the matter is that there's a larger society out there that you actually are a part of, and you are asserting that right over the interests of humanity, including that what you were doing here is, as you know, disproportionately affecting black and brown people, immigrants, people, disabled people, elderly, people in nursing homes. It's not neutral what you're doing, and even worse, it's affecting people, or just as bad, it's affecting people around the world. And this idea that if you're going to insist that you have a right to do whatever the fuck you want, then you need to take off those sneakers with rubber that comes from South Asia. You need to take off the clothes that were made in other countries. You need to stop eating fruit and vegetables that the immigrants pick for you. And if you do all of that, then maybe we'll listen to you and still tell you you're wrong. But you're standing at the top of something here, atop of a food chain that is actually this empire of exploitation, imperialism. So that's the first point, just to round this out, that there are these other rallies, and that actually is part of how fascism comes to power, because they find some ways to take in discontent of a larger population, and then this gives approval to the worst excesses, and people think, well, that's just a fringe. But actually that fringe is driving this, and that fringe is backed up by very powerful forces. The second thing that you spoke about, Pete, is people sitting it out at home. Of course, I do believe people should continue to shelter in place as long as that's necessary, but I think we have to be clear that the Democratic Party is a ruling class party, and as such, they've never, since the beginning of this administration, mobilized the masses of people to take to the streets, which is the only way you're going to drive out this regime. And we've talked about this many times, but if Trump is re-elected, if Trump loses bias in the Electoral College and says it's rigged, and even if Trump himself somehow or other goes, if he's defeated both ways, which is not at all a sure thing, what about this whole fascist movement? Not only the stormtroopers in the street here, but also all the forces behind them. What will you do then? And too many people are going along with an idea of painless progress, that all you have to do is vote in November and you will deal with this. But back to the Democratic Party, as Avakian has made clear in the film "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go," that to the Democrats who are part of maintaining this system, order is more important than justice, even if it means a fascist order. And that's been shown over the last couple of years. So I just want to clarify one point. It's true that out in the streets in Los Angeles on May 1st, there were the revolutionaries squared off against the fascists, and that represented two different futures: a revolutionary future for the emancipation of all humanity and a fascist future. But that's not all who was out there in the square, and that's not all who was out there in the country demanding that the country open up and that the shelter in place end. This included, many people. Let me just say what this other future was. There were people out in the streets, and there's people in this country, in fact, probably the majority of people, who don't want the Trump-Pence fascism. They don't know very much, if anything, about the revolution and the new communism. But what they want is they want the Democrats to come to power. They wanted things to go back to the way they were before. including in the organization that we formed, Refuse Fascism. There are many people who believe in the Democratic Party or reforming the Democratic Party. And that represents that there's two futures within the system itself that are clashing. The fascist future and what has been before. And, many of these people are going to vote for Joe Biden. And this is something, as I've said before, it's not, the problem is not that Joe Biden is sleepy, but that he's a representative of this ruling class, and done all kinds of things that the people who are actually going to hold their nose and vote for him wouldn't support. And we want to be struggling with those people over why that is not only not an answer for the emancipation of humanity, but to be honest, people, and to actually confront the reality that we face. You're not going to go back to what was before. First off, what came before was not good for the majority of humanity. And secondly, it's not possible. These fascist forces are consolidating, and they're going to have to be driven from power. And then ultimately we need a revolution. So we see ourselves as bringing forward a third future in opposition to the two futures of this system. And with that second future, that says, okay, can we go back to what was before, please? Can we have our country back? We want to be struggling with all those people as we stand shoulder to shoulder in fighting and getting out into the streets to remove this regime from power. And I think together with all of those people, we can say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. So those are the points I wanted to add, and I know you have a little bit more of the show. Actually, we have a very important thing to come that Sansara is going to tell you about, but because we're ending on that point, let me say for myself and to thank the audience for watching episode 7, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, well, I think that was very important. We're going to stay on this because this fascism is not going away. So I really want to thank Pete for being out in the street. I want to thank you for spending the hour plus with us watching this episode. If you learned anything in this episode, if it sparked questions in your mind that you want to hear more about, if there's things you disagree with and want to argue about or clarify, write to us and comment below. Please take a minute and do that. We read these, we respond to them, we learn from them. Also, spread the word. We need to let the world know about this Revolution Nothing Less show. You're not going to get what you get from this show anywhere else. Tell your friends, tell your family, spread it on social media, and go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/therevcoms, and become a sustainer of our show. At whatever level you can, join the community of people who are putting this show on, engaging with it, and fueling this revolutionary media as part of the movement for an actual revolution. So with that, I want to close out by turning over the mic to Luan, who is going to share the Mayday communique, which Pete referenced, which we spread, the Revolution Tour wrote, and we spread all over the country among people of every background, summoning them to revolution on this revolutionary internationalist holiday, a call to real revolution and the new communism.
A world on fire from environmental devastation. A world of 7 million refugees fleeing war and climate catastrophe. And where none of the powers that be have any real answers to this. A world being taken over by fascist regimes, whipping up genocidal xenophobia and religious fundamentalism, slamming women and LGBTQ people back into the Dark Ages forms of oppression, attacking science and promoting ignorance, all backed up with brute force. A world now ravaged by disease, made 1,000,000 times worse by the pre-existing inequalities of this system, where Black people, Latinos, and Native Americans are dying at much higher rates, and America's overflowing prisons and immigration jails are in danger of becoming death camps. When the basis exists to end this madness and get on the road to overcoming all forms of inequality and oppression. A world where the wealth, technology, and global interconnection of humanity could enable us to meet people's needs and work together to solve problems. Where today, people are kept in ignorance, when they could be trained with a scientific method to understand and change the world, with all the wonders of discovery and ability to meet the challenges that opens up. But instead, the world is held in chains by a capitalist imperialist system. A system not based on cooperation, but on private ownership and profit, driven by ruthless competition between capitalists and nation states. A system that today gives millions the choice of risking death and disease or facing the certainty of imminent hunger. A system that is nothing but an obstacle to humanity. A system that is today being reinforced by fascists like Donald Trump and his MAGA moron foot soldiers running around demanding America be reopened while the coronavirus is still in full effect. On May 1st, we declare our determination to overthrow this system through revolution, when the conditions for that revolution have come into being, and to build a world community of humanity without borders, without oppression, exploitation, and all the destructive divisions between people, a communist world. That world is possible, and we have the key to unlock that possibility. The new communism developed by Baba Vakian, BA, the most important political thinker and leader in the world today. Baba Vakian has advanced the science of revolution, developed a strategy for revolution that could actually win, and authored the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America, the vision and blueprint for the future society on the road to human emancipation.
Why is this the state of humanity? There is one fundamental reason. The basic nature of the system of capitalism, imperialism that we live under, and the way, because of its very nature, it continually perpetrates and perpetuates horror after horror. And in fundamental terms, we have two choices. Either live with all this and condemn future generations to the same, or worse, if they have a future at all, or make revolution.
If you want to know more about this revolution and the world it aims for, and learn more as you participate in working to bring that into being, join us today and help getting this communique out. Go to revcom.us and begin to get into Baba Vakian, BA.